At sunrise, my doorbell rang. Standing outside was a man in a suit holding a thick envelope. Not a real court officer, I'd later discover, but a private process server my own daughter had hired specifically to make it look official. She wanted an audience. She wanted neighbors watching. She wanted me trembling on my own doorstep while she stood on my lawn holding her phone up like she was filming breaking news. "Pack your bags, old woman," she yelled, loud enough for the entire street to hear. "You're finally out." Her husband laughed. The process server shifted uncomfortably. Curtains moved up and down the block. One neighbor actually walked outside with a cup of coffee, expecting to watch an eviction unfold in real time. My daughter loved every second of it. She had spent the previous year quietly building a case against me. She told relatives I was becoming forgetful. She told people I repeated myself constantly. She told anyone who would listen that I couldn't manage my own finances anymore. She even convinced certain family members I was showing early signs of dementia. By that morning, enough people believed her version of me that nobody questioned why she was suddenly claiming ownership of the home I had lived in for 32 years. She thought she had already won. She thought the documents in that envelope made her untouchable. She thought recording my humiliation on her phone would be the perfect final chapter of her story. Then, she made one mistake that unraveled everything. She handed the envelope to the process server and told him to show me the specific page proving the house now belonged to her. I took the folder. I opened it. I began reading slowly. The smile appeared on my face before I even reached the second page. My daughter's confidence vanished so fast I almost felt sorry for her. Because buried inside those documents was proof that whoever had prepared them had fundamentally misunderstood the trust they were attempting to steal. 24 years earlier, after personally witnessing one of the most destructive inheritance disputes I had ever seen, I built protections into my estate plan that could only be activated by one specific thing: not disagreement, not family conflict, fraud. Deliberate, documented, provable fraud. The kind of legal protection most people never know exists until someone they love forces them to use it. My daughter didn't know it existed. Neither did her husband. As they stood on my lawn recording what they genuinely believed would be my complete destruction, they had no idea they were capturing the very first moments of their own. I closed the folder. I looked directly into my daughter's camera, and I asked her one question she was completely unprepared for. "Before you hired someone to deliver these papers," I said quietly, "did you ever actually read the clause that gives me the right to take everything back?" For the first time that morning, the street went completely silent. Have you ever watched someone become so certain they were winning that they completely stopped checking whether they were actually right? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and some of what you've shared already is just as unbelievable as what happened next. The process server followed me inside. My daughter immediately objected. She wanted everything to stay outside, where the neighbors were still watching. That reaction alone told me she was far more interested in the spectacle of humiliating me than in actually proving any legal claim. The server sat at my dining room table while I retrieved a locked fireproof cabinet I had kept for years. My daughter had always assumed it held old tax records and outdated paperwork. What it actually contained was every original trust document, every amendment, every notarized instruction, and every property record connected to my entire estate. Organized, dated, and ready. The server spent nearly 20 minutes carefully comparing my originals against the documents my daughter had provided. The longer he reviewed them, the quieter the room became. Then he noticed the signatures didn't match. Then he noticed the dates were inconsistent. Then he noticed something far more serious. The amendment supposedly giving my daughter legal control over the property had been signed on a date when I was attending a legal conference nearly 600 miles away. I still had the conference registration, hotel receipts, and photographs from that exact weekend. My daughter suddenly claimed there must have been some kind of misunderstanding. Her husband attempted to blame a document preparation company they had hired online. Neither explanation held up for even a moment. The server asked where the amendment had originally been filed. Neither of them could answer. He asked who had witnessed the signatures. Silence. He asked who had prepared and submitted the paperwork. More silence. Then came the moment I will never forget as long as I live. The server carefully closed both folders, looked directly at my daughter, and said, "At this point, I have no legal authority to remove her from this property today." The color left her face completely. She stormed out, still clutching her phone, still filming, still furious. What she didn't understand yet was that her failed attempt had just created a problem 10 times larger than the one she came to cause. Because while the server was reviewing documents at my table, I had found something buried in the filing records that frightened me far more than any forged signature ever could. Someone hadn't just tried to steal my house. Someone had been quietly moving other assets for nearly a year, and every trail led directly back to my daughter's husband. Have you ever discovered that what you thought was the real problem was actually just the surface of something much deeper and darker underneath? Tell me in the comments, because what I found next changed everything I thought I understood about my own family. That night, I sat alone at my dining room table and began reviewing every financial document connected to my estate. I wasn't celebrating. Something about the forged amendment kept bothering me. It was too sloppy, too obvious. It felt less like a real plan and more like a distraction designed to keep my attention in the wrong direction. Around midnight, I found the first transfer, $3,000 from an investment account I rarely monitored, small enough to ignore. Then another, 4,000, then more. Individually, each one looked completely harmless. Together, they formed a pattern stretching back 11 months. By 2 in the morning, I had traced nearly $80,000 that had quietly disappeared from accounts connected to my estate. My hands were shaking, not because of the money itself, but because every single transfer had happened while that man was sitting at my dinner table, passing the bread basket and asking about my health. 2 days later, the financial institution delivered a full activity report. Every transfer ultimately flowed into companies controlled by my son-in-law. Some were disguised as consulting fees, others moved through layered business accounts, but the destination was always identical. When I called my daughter and told her what I had found, she denied everything immediately. Then I asked the question she hadn't prepared for. If you had no knowledge of any of this, then why does your signature appear on 3 of the authorization forms? The silence lasted 9 seconds. She hung up without a word. That was the moment I stopped wondering whether she had been manipulated. She hadn't been. She was the plan. My attorney filed emergency actions within days to freeze further transfers while investigators began their review. My son-in-law's response was immediate. He began calling every relative he could reach, telling them I had lost my grip on reality, that I was confused and vindictive, that I was tearing the family apart because I couldn't accept no longer being in control. For a short time, some relatives believed him. Then investigators began interviewing people. Then bank records surfaced. Then signatures were formally verified. Then timelines were reconstructed day by day. Every lie collapsed one after another like dominoes. But the moment that shook me most came when investigators uncovered something none of us had anticipated. The money wasn't the real goal. The house wasn't the real goal. Those were only the opening moves. Hidden inside a stack of business filings was a plan so calculated and so cold that my own attorney sat in complete silence for nearly a full minute after reading it. And for the first time since that morning on my doorstep, I finally understood exactly why they had needed me out of that house so desperately. If someone you love has ever chosen what they could take from you over who you actually are to them, share this with someone who needs to hear it today, because what was hidden in that filing changed everything. And some warnings only reach people when someone who cares passes them along. The answer was inside a cardboard box I hadn't opened in years. While investigators worked through the financial records, I searched through documents connected to my late husband's business dealings. Buried beneath old insurance papers was a signed investment agreement I had nearly forgotten existed. The moment I read it, every single piece fell into place. My daughter and her husband never wanted the house itself. They wanted what it legally represented. 22 years earlier, my husband had purchased a parcel of commercial land through a private investment partnership. That asset had grown quietly and steadily over 2 decades. What began as a modest purchase was now worth several $1 million, and the ownership rights were tied directly and specifically to my estate. If I had been forced out, declared incompetent, or pressured into signing replacement trust documents, control of that asset would have transferred directly to them. Suddenly, every forged document, every stolen transfer, every whispered rumor about my memory, every carefully planted seed of doubt about my mental clarity, all of it made perfect sense. This was never impulsive greed. This was a constructed plan that had been building for over a year. 2 weeks later, investigators completed their review. The evidence was thorough and overwhelming. Financial records, private communications, forged filings, and signed authorization forms all pointed without exception in the same direction. Relatives who had believed my daughter's husband's version of events went quiet one by one as the truth emerged. Several apologized to me directly and personally. The moment that mattered most happened during a family meeting my daughter herself had requested. She arrived believing she could still explain everything away. She was confident. Her husband was visibly angry. Neither of them knew that everyone already seated in that room had already reviewed the full evidence before they walked in. For 20 minutes, they blamed accountants, document preparation services, miscommunications, and bad professional advice. Then the investigator opened a specific folder and began reading messages the two of them had exchanged privately over the previous 14 months. The room went completely still. Every excuse collapsed simultaneously. Every lie they had told about me came directly back to them. My daughter's husband attempted to interrupt several times before going silent entirely. My daughter began crying. Some relatives cried as well, not out of sympathy for her, but because they understood how close they had come to helping dismantle the life of someone who had never once stopped trusting them. The house remained mine. The funds were recovered through legal action. The investment stayed protected exactly as my husband had always intended. As for my daughter and her husband, they spent years facing consequences for choices they had been absolutely certain would never come to light. The last time I saw my daughter,
She asked me how I had known their plan would ultimately fail. I looked at her and told her the simple truth. Because you spent so much energy trying to take what was mine, I said, that you never once stopped to learn how I had protected it. And that is the only lesson I hope anyone listening carries forward. Trust matters deeply. Family matters deeply. But neither one should ever replace the quiet wisdom of protecting yourself. Sometimes the person who knows the most about everything you own is sitting closest to you at the table. Protecting yourself is never a sign of suspicion. It is a sign of experience that was earned the hard way.
3 months later, there was a knock at my front door. My daughter was standing there alone. No attorney, no husband, no prepared script from anyone else's advice. She looked older than I remembered, worn down in a way that had nothing to do with age. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then she asked the question she had probably been carrying for months. Was there ever a moment you thought about just letting it go? I looked at her and understood immediately that she still didn't see it clearly. She thought this had always been about money, about property, about legal documents and winning. It never was. No, I answered, because the house was never what hurt me. She waited. Then what did? I took a breath. Watching my own daughter stand on my lawn and cheer while strangers tried to remove me from my home. Her eyes filled completely. I made mistakes, she said quietly. No, I told her. A mistake is forgetting a birthday. A mistake is saying something in anger that you regret. What you did required planning. It required waking up every single day and choosing to continue. The silence between us was heavier than anything we had ever argued about. Finally, she whispered, "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I thought carefully before answering. "Forgiveness isn't the hard part," I said. "Trust is." She lowered her head. For the first time since that morning on my doorstep, I felt no anger, no satisfaction, no sense of victory, only grief. Grief that something which could never be replaced had been permanently broken by a choice that was never necessary. Before she turned to leave, she asked one final question. What was the single biggest mistake we made? I looked at her directly and said, "You spent so much time counting everything I owned that you forgot to value who I was." She stood completely still for a moment. Then she walked away. I never saw her husband again. I stayed in my home. I kept my memories exactly where they belonged. And every morning, when I sit on my front porch with my coffee, I remember the one thing this entire experience taught me more clearly than anything else. The strongest protection you will ever have isn't written in a trust document or locked in a filing cabinet. It's having the courage to stand completely still when the people you love most forget exactly who you are. If you have ever had someone choose what they could gain over who you actually were to them, tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if any part of this reminded you of someone who deserves to be reminded that their worth was never up for negotiation, send this to them today.